Welcome to the third in a series of political candidate forums in advance of the August 18th primary election. Many of you are familiar with our forums in the past, but this year we're bigger and better than ever. This time our series is a cooperative production of the Capital Region News Collaborative and the League of Women Voters of Tallahassee. Our candidates today are running for the position of 2nd Judicial Circuit Judge Group 13. I'm Tom Flanagan from WFSU Public Media. I'm joined by Steve Stewart from Tallahassee Reports and Danielle Irwin from the League of Women Voters of Tallahassee. We're going to be questioning today's candidates on various topics of interest to the voting public.
We will have several more forums in the coming week, and other journalists from the Capital Regional News Collaborative will be rotating through these seats to ask the questions. In addition to Tallahassee Reports and WFSU, you will also see folks from WTXL, WCTV, the Capital Outlook, and the Tallahassee Democrat on this stage. The collaborative is committed to providing deeper, community-centered reporting on local issues. You can learn more about the collaborative at cfnf.org/CRNC. The candidates for today's 2nd Judicial Circuit Judge Group 13 race are currently sitting left to right in alphabetical order: Rashad Green and incumbent J. Lee Marsh.
Reminder for those watching us on social media, please hit the share button and help your friends see today's discussion live. For those at home, here's how the forums will work. We'll rotate which candidates get to answer first. We have a lot of questions, so we're going to ask the candidates to keep their answers to about 45 seconds, sometimes shorter for follow-ups. We will keep time. We have a bell which we will ding when your time is up. Candidates, you do not have to come to a dead stop right then, but please finish your sentence and we'll move on. We will also have a rapid-fire lightning round of questions with shorter answers later in the broadcast. Any questions before we begin? Great, then let's start with the first question.
We will jump right into it. We will also tell you how much time you have for each of the questions, so we'll give you that little cue before we turn it over to you. Voters often hear that judges simply follow the law. But as you know, in reality, judges make difficult decisions every day that can affect public safety, individual liberty, and families' lives. So what do you see as the most consequential responsibility of a circuit judge in the community? And how has your experience prepared you to handle it? And let's start with Mr. Green. If we could, you have 1 minute, please.
Thank you. My name is Rashad Green, and I think that the most consequential thing that a judge does in the community is to apply the law fairly and impartially in the execution of his duties. A judge should be not only a leader in the legal community, but a leader in the community at large. And I think that one of the most important things that a judge can do is to walk humbly amongst their peers in the community, and also practice impartiality, not just in the courtroom, but in their daily lives.
All right, we'll have the same question in 1 minute, please, for you, Mr. Lee.
Compassion, justice, equality. These are the traits that a judge should have, and these are the traits that I've had over the last 8 years as your circuit judge. I'm J. Lee Marsh, the current sitting circuit judge in Group 13. We have to make sure as judges to follow the law, whether you're from Gretna or Griffin Heights, Bristol or Basin Street. And so it's listening and being involved. I'm born and raised here, and I have had the privilege of serving in a public capacity my entire adult life. And for that reason, you should re-elect me for circuit judge in this group.
Staying with you for 30 seconds here, if we could, Mr. Marsh, can you explain your judicial philosophy in nice everyday terms, please?
My philosophy is to follow the law as it is written. Judges are not policymakers, or local elected officials, or legislators are the policymakers, but it's to do that understanding the law, hearing and listening, giving people the opportunity to be heard. People want to bring their disputes to a forum that they can do it peacefully and resolve it being heard and having that equal footing before the law.
Same question, Mr. Green, 30 seconds, please.
My judicial philosophy is for a judge to always follow the law first and foremost. Judges do not create law, and they are not policy makers. When acting as a judge, one should always act with impartiality and with respect for the parties and the dignity that the community would want to see in a judge. I think that judges should always uphold the law and follow precedent in every single case.
Okay, Mr. Green, in 45 seconds, expand a little bit on your Tallahassee roots and how those impact your judicial outlook.
Absolutely. I am born and raised in Tallahassee, Florida. I am the grandson of our state's first African-American Florida Supreme Court Justice, the Honorable Joseph Woodrow Hatchett. I graduated from Lincoln High School and thereafter attended Florida A&M University. After undergraduate studies, I attended Florida Coastal School of Law, where I graduated with distinction and where I served as judicial extern to the Honorable Monty C. Richardson, U.S. Magistrate Court Judge. Thereafter, I served as a law clerk for the U.S. Court of Appeals under the Honorable Charles R. Wilson, and then I became an assistant state attorney with the 13th Judicial Circuit, where I tried several bench and jury trials.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Marsh, same question.
Thank you. I was born and raised here, right in Tallahassee. I was valedictorian in my class of Leon High School. I then went off to the United States Naval Academy to serve, get a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, and then serve as a Navy submarine officer, where the Navy then sent me to law school, and I served the rest of a career as a judge advocate. After retiring in 2016 from the Navy, I moved back to my home where I had always kept roots, where I served as the Assistant Attorney General, and then I got on the bench. I've got deep roots here, having had church here. I'm a church elder. I'm a member of the Rotary Club of Tallahassee, and I stay close with the community in which I was raised. My family's here. My love is here. My children go to the public schools here.
All right, Mr. Marsh, can you describe what you believe is the central difference between you and your opponent there next door? 45 seconds.
Well, I don't really know Mr. Green very well, but experience is the difference. It's service and experience. I've done this job for 8 years. As an attorney, I tried over 22 jury trials. As a circuit judge, I've tried 110 jury trials. I've sat in the civil division making decisions on national cases. I've done the work in civil, in felony, in probate, in delinquency, guardianship. I've done each of those, and so I just have the experience. I don't need that learning curve. I just need to ask you to let me continue to serve you. I've served the nation and the state my entire life.
Thank you. Mr. Green, please.
Yes, so I think what differentiates me is my wide-ranging legal experience, which includes having formerly worked alongside multiple federal judges, having formerly been an assistant state attorney where I've tried several jury and bench trials, and also having experience as a civil defense litigator. So I think one of the things that makes me qualified for this job is the fact that I've seen the legal system from all kinds of angles in all different areas of practice throughout my career.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Candidates, we're going to turn to issues in the courtroom. We'll start with Mr. Marsh. What legal considerations should guide a judge's analysis of pretrial release decisions under Florida law? 45 seconds, please.
Pretrial release is governed by Florida statutes, Chapter 903 and 907. I have been the first appearance judge in making those decisions. There's 16 factors that the court must consider. And at first appearance, you try to get as much information as you can. But then after those decisions are made, I've been a trial judge where then the parties are able to have a more robust hearing and a bond reduction or whatever. And you consider those factors. They're in the Florida statutes. I've used them. I've applied them. They deal with background, criminal history, financial situation, the seriousness of the offense, things like that. And so those are the cues that I follow to follow the law and set an appropriate release. Understanding a person charged is presumed innocent, and so they are also treated accordingly.
Mr. Green, 45 seconds.
Yes, as a current criminal defense attorney, we face this constantly. But one of the factors that judges should consider is whether or not they can secure the defendant's presence in court with a bond. You want to consider the prior record of the defendant. You want to consider whether the defendant has ties to the community, and what are those ties. The source of any funds that the defendant would put up for a bond. Whether or not the defendant poses a flight risk, whether or not the defendant poses a danger to the immediate community, and whether or not there can be reasonable conditions that can be put in place to ensure the safety of the community and the presence of the defendant in the courtroom.
Okay, Mr. Green, a follow-up on this issue. This issue has been a core one in the district with the debate over the impeachment of a colleague of yours on the bench. When executive branch publicly calls for the impeachment of a judge based on a single controversial ruling, how should a judge respond to such political pressure? 45 seconds, please.
I don't think the judge should respond. I think a judge should carry out the duties impartially and faithfully and execute those duties in a dignified manner. What happened to our colleague is very unfortunate. She acted within judicial discretion, and she had the ability to do what she did, and she has, from what I understand, the full support of the community and the legal community.
Mr. Marsh.
Whereas I might not have made the same decision, that judge was perfectly within her discretion to do what she did. She asked appropriate questions. So what a judge should do, number one, is the judicial canons talk about some of this. The judge doesn't respond. The judge keeps doing her job as she has done. She continues to do that, serving the people, making the best decisions that she can. As far as the policymakers go, they can change the law if they desire to, and I think they've done that in this case. But the judge must just follow the law as it is before them, giving dignity and respect to all people that appear before them.
Okay, and a final follow-up, starting with you, Mr. Marsh. Do you believe judges today have to consider public or political backlash when making controversial decisions? 30 seconds.
Absolutely not. I mean, those pressures are there. I've faced them. When I threw out the redistricting maps back in 2022, there was a lot of political pressure. But you have to deal with the law as it is at that time. And that case was subsequently overturned on appeal because the Supreme Court decided they didn't want me to use the maps that they had previously drawn. So, again, political pressure is always there. That's part of the job. But the judges in the judiciary are the third co-equal branch of government. We stay in our lanes and do our jobs.
Mr. Green.
No, I think a judge should not respond to political backlash. The judge must apply the law without fear or favor, whatever the outcome may be. And so to the extent that there is political pressure, someone in that office understands that when they take the job, and they should not respond to political pressure of any kind in the carrying out and the execution of their duties.
Thank you, candidates. Okay, new question. We'll start with you, Mr. Green. 30 seconds. How do you feel about cameras, still or video, in the courtroom?
I am a proponent for cameras in the courtroom. One of the main reasons is it instills confidence in the judicial system. I think transparency is very important, and the public has a right to see what's going on inside the courtroom. I think it's good for not only the parties but the community at large, so that the high integrity that the courts come with is always going to be protected when people can see.
Mr. Marsh.
The Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to a public trial. Cameras bring trust. It lets the people see exactly what's going on, hear what's going on, so they don't have to rely on social media, on news clips. They can watch what's going on themselves and understand the hard work that our juries do, our judges, our attorneys, and the litigants that are before them. They can see the fairness, they can see the equality, and they can hold the parties and the judges and everyone else accountable by seeing what's going on.
Thank you. Mr. Marsh, we'll start with you on this next question. While county courts handle minor disputes and local issues, circuit courts handle major civil and criminal matters that often lead to high-profile appeals. How do you, or should you, feel if your case is overruled by a higher court, and what does that experience mean for you as a judge? 45 seconds.
Well, I've had this happen. Currently, as of yesterday, Westlaw said I had been affirmed over 92% of the time, but I have been reversed. Trial courts do the best they can with what they've got. I've had high-profile reversals in the redistricting case, and that's okay. That's our system. We have appellate courts that have more time and more resources to look deep down into those cases. Circuit judges, we do what we can with the limited resources we have. That's our system, and plus, I'm a human. I'm just like everybody else. I make mistakes, and I learn from them, and that's what the appellate courts do, is they help guide us as the trial judges when we do err.
Mr. Green.
Trial courts are oftentimes making split-second decisions. So when a trial court is appealed or overturned on appeal, I think as a trial judge, you should take that with humility and learn where the mistake happened and to do better with applying the law thereafter. It's going to happen. Trial judges are under a tremendous amount of pressure, and they're oftentimes making decisions in real time, and that's going to come with mistakes. But I think it's what you do after you realize that there's a mistake, whether you walk humbly and learn from it, is what I think a trial judge should adhere to.
Okay, thank you. Recent concerns have been raised about delays, filing errors, and record accuracy in the Leon County Clerk's Office that can affect due process and even public safety. What role should a circuit judge play in identifying and responding to systemic failures in the justice system that are outside their courtroom but impact outcomes? And we'll start with Mr. Green, 45 seconds.
I think really one of the only things the court can do is be mindful that they exist and to take procedures and move forward with trying to find ways to account for such failures that are not in the court's control. But understanding that those things exist and responding to them is what I think a trial judge should do.
Thank you. Mr. Marsh.
Teamwork. We're a team in the court. I know the clerk personally. I've worked with her and her people. They work hard to try to get it right. It's a team effort. We work together with the different constitutional officers, the clerk of court, the sheriff's office and their bailiff's unit, our judicial assistants, and it's just to make sure we do everything we can, opening lines of communication to let people know when there's issues and look for a solution to solve them and make sure people have a fair, equitable, and just time in their courtroom.
Thank you. Danielle?
Okay. Lee Marsh, we'll begin with you on this next round related to judicial integrity. Surveys and public discourse indicate declining public trust in our nation's judicial systems. Do you agree with that sentiment? And as a circuit court judge, how do you plan to protect the integrity of your courtroom and restore the public's confidence in the rule of law? 45 seconds.
I don't know if I can speak for what others think, but what I've seen in actuality is a fair and just system. There are problems, and we work every day to restore that trust and confidence. But what some of it is because it's those very judicial ethics that we follow. We don't respond. We don't take the political bait that's given out there, responding to every Twitter tweet or anything like that. It's important that we represent ourselves properly before the parties. The word will get out. The people that come into the court need dignity and respect, and when the judiciary shows that to each and every person in there, whether from Apalachicola or here in Tallahassee, they'll know that the system was fair to them.
Thank you. Rashad Green, same to you.
I do agree that sentiment does exist, and one of the things that a trial court can do is maintain independence in everything that it does and all of its rulings. So I think that one of the ways that the trial courts can rehabilitate its image with the public is transparency and independence and application of the rule of law equally to all people.
Rashad Green, we'll stay with you for a 30-second follow-up. How should a judge approach questions of recusal or potential conflicts of interest?
I think the trial judge will know more than anybody whether or not a conflict exists. So being vigilant and rooting out conflicts as a circuit court judge is one way to do that. And then also being honest with yourself and honest with the parties. Bringing any conflicts that may exist to the attention of the parties is what a trial judge should do. And if the conflict or the perceived conflict cannot be overcome, the trial judge should recuse themselves.
Mr. Marsh, 30 seconds.
Well, there's a couple issues. One is disclosure. If there's matters the parties need to know about, the judge is to disclose them. The next is recusal. If the judge, if there's any reason that he or she may appear not impartial, they should recuse themselves. And finally, there's disqualification, which is if a party thinks the judge should leave, they put it in writing, and the judge rules not on the truth of the matter, but on whether it states a legal cause. I've dealt with this issue. I've recused myself in cases that require legal recusal. There's plenty of case law on that, and I make sure I follow the rules.
Thank you. We'll stay with you, Mr. Marsh, on this next question. What steps have you taken to identify and address your own implicit biases that, if you're reelected, could affect your decision-making? You have 45 seconds.
When I was first came on the bench, we had extensive judicial training, and one of those units was implicit bias. We all have it. Bias isn't a bad word. It just talks about we all have our own facts and circumstances under which we've lived. So recognizing them and understanding that they're there is step one, so that you can make sure those aren't ever used in your decision-making process. Awareness is key, and I've trained in this, and we do continuing judicial training in that matter, and I've done that for the last 8 years.
Thank you. Mr. Green, same to you.
I think first and foremost, recognizing that implicit bias exists within all of us. And once you've recognized it exists, then the trial court judge should find ways to deal with it. Seeking training opportunities is one of the ways that a trial judge should deal with that, and being transparent with the parties and themselves about potential implicit bias will also be of great help.
Thank you. Mr. Green, we'll stay with you for this final question in this segment. Is judicial activism a widespread problem, and how would you define it? 30 seconds.
I do think judicial activism is a problem. I don't think it's a widespread problem, but I would define it as a judge who is not applying the law, but seeking a preferred outcome in a case through its rulings.
Thank you. Mr. Marsh.
I think the perception of judicial activism is out there because a lot of times it's when people don't agree with the decision. Judges are going to obviously make the decision. 50% of the people are not going to be happy about them. But what it is, judicial activism is not applying the law. It's applying a policy decision to justify an outcome. I don't do it. I don't see a lot of judges that do it. But again, the public needs to know that, and part of that is through these kinds of forum, and also like those cameras in the courtroom, so they can see what's actually happening in a case.
Thank you. Steve?
Mr. Green, this question is for you, 45 seconds. A question from a viewer. A recent case in Florida has raised questions about whether the timing of judicial retirements or resignations can result in elections being canceled and judges instead being appointed by the governor. What is the appropriate balance between executive authority and voters' right to choose judges?
I think that voters should always have the ability to choose the judges that are going to stand in judgment of them. Also, I think judges have a responsibility to understand that there is a judicial election process associated with the positions that they hold, and to be mindful when they decide to retire of the rules that govern those judicial elections.
Mr. Marsh?
It's not the decision I would have made. I would have let the voters decide. It's important that judges be held accountable, that they stand before you, the people, as I did back in 2020 when I was elected to this office. It's an important cycle we go through every 6 years. It's a way for the people to understand the judges, understand their background, understand their experience and their temperament. And I ask you to let me stay and re-elect me to this office.
Okay, next question, and we'll start with Mr. Marsh. How do you assess Governor DeSantis' impact on the ideological balance of Florida's courts, and what are the implications for the judicial system?
Well, I'll say I don't know Governor DeSantis. I think I met him once in the Navy, but I don't deal with his decisions. He's the executive. The Constitution gives him certain powers. I just know that what it entails for me is that I follow the law as it is written. I follow the appellate case law. There's a way that our Constitution requires judges be elected and appointed, and it's able to be changed. So I don't concern myself with that. I stay in my own lane and do what I follow the oath that I have taken in this office.
Mr. Green, 45 seconds.
I think that as long as the law is being followed with the appointment and the election of judges, that should guide us. Most of the time, judges who go through the appointment process are, vetted a lot, and in these types of forums, they are also able to tell a lot about themselves and their backgrounds. So I'm not sure about the political nature, but I think as long as judges are appointed that have been vetted, and either through the vetting process that happens with attorneys or through the voting process, the judiciary will be fine.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, both of you, given your vast expertise and background, are familiar with the concept of a legal brief. This is our analog. This is our acclaimed lightning round in which you get an opportunity to answer a question in one sentence. So we will start with you, Mr. Marsh, if we could. Which Florida court decision in any Florida court has most impacted the lives of Floridians, in your opinion, and why?
Gideon versus Wainwright. It recognized what was always there, which is the entitlement to counsel for people that can't afford an attorney in a criminal case.
Thank you. Mr. Green.
My case would be Virgil Hawkins v. Board of Control, because that case was instrumental in the implementation of desegregating our law schools in the state of Florida.
Appreciate that. Sticking with you, Mr. Green, what U.S. Supreme Court justice, past or present, do you most admire and why?
I tend to admire several, but if I had to put a finger on one, it would probably be Justice Sotomayor, just because of her background and her courageous, independent writings as a judicial, as a Supreme Court justice.
Thanks, Mr. Marsh.
John Marshall. He's established the whole backdrop of our judiciary and keeping the other branches in check.
Okay, Mr. Marsh, question from a viewer. If you could have any superpower, what would it be and why?
A super empathetic heart. And I do that because that's what we need. We need to have empathy with those that we deal with.
Thank you. Mr. Green.
I would tend to have to go towards Captain America because Captain America is trustworthy and has a lot of the characteristics that I think that lawyers would want to see in a judge and the community that would want to see in a judge.
I'm sure the Marvel canon would appreciate that. Mr. Green, if we could stick with you, the question we're often asked by voters to ask the candidates often has little to do with the local judge's race, but it's kind of become a litmus test for them and very much speaks to our democracy at large. Do you have confidence in the outcome of our local, state, and national elections?
Yeah, of course I do. I have confidence in the elections that go on in the state of Florida, and I don't have any reason not to.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh.
I absolutely trust them. We've had great supervisors of election here in the Second Circuit. My entire adult life, I trust them completely.
Mr. Marsh, what is your most prized endorsement?
I think my most prized endorsement is from a number of sheriffs in this circuit. They endorse me fully.
Thank you, Mr. Green.
I would say my donors and my supporters, who comprise of members of the community, from school teachers to lawyers to doctors to business owners, those endorsements and their confidence in me to be a circuit judge mean the world to me.
Okay, thank you. What's one misconception, Mr. Green, about judges that you wish voters understood better?
I think maybe one misconception would be that judges are mean, but the application of the law is a serious job, and I wish that the voters got to interact with their judges more often.
Mr. Marsh.
That what we do is easy. I stay up at night often with the difficult decisions I have to make because it affects individuals and families.
All right. Mr. Marsh, question from a viewer here. Where are two of your favorite places to spend time in Tallahassee?
I love going, well, Actually, I don't know, Tallahassee, I was thinking the whole circuit, but I love going down to Wakulla Springs and our those communities. And I also like spending time just with my family out at our local restaurants. I'm kind of a foodie.
Very good. Okay. Mr. Green.
In Tallahassee, I would say Lake Ella or Maclay Gardens. If we're talking circuit-wide, I'd have to say our family farm
Okay.
in Jefferson County.
Very good. And finally, Mr. Green, outside of your legal work and legal career, what do you believe has been your biggest contribution to the community?
I think one of my biggest contributions to the community is being in it, and I do that in a number of ways. One of my favorites is coaching youth sports and being the coach of my son's football and baseball teams, working with children, and coaching them to be, their very best.
Very fine. And Mr. Marsh?
Undoubtedly, my 20 years of service to the United States Navy. I've put public service as my calling in life, and I want to continue serving the people here.
Well done. Ms. Danielle?
Well, you have successfully made it through the lightning round, so let's move on to the topic of disparities. Lee Marsh, will begin with you. What do you believe are the causes of high rates of incarceration of people of color in our community? You have 1 minute.
Unfortunately, resources. For too long, our marginalized communities have faced economic struggles, and this often leads them to not have the services they need, whether it's unmet mental health support, looking at food sparsity, and education influences. So I think ultimately it's those resources that have caused people to get in situations where they get looked at by the law.
Thank you. Mr. Green.
Yes, I would also say resources, but also implicit bias in policing. If you go and look at the booking reports and the mugshots that are there, a lot of them look a lot like me, and I think that's due to a lack of resources, number one, and then also implicit bias in policing. And I think that understanding that and knowing that as you look at cases, it could help improve that, but understanding it is what you want to do.
Thank you. For this follow-up, we'll stay with you, Rashad Green. What do you believe are the causes for the high number of juvenile offenders in our community, and what can the courts do about it? You have 1 minute.
Yeah, so I've done juvenile cases in my career, and what I tend to see is parents that are not engaged in their child's activities, and then also people who are in marginalized communities dealing with very little resources. The one good thing about the courts is that there's a lot of programs that help youths in the juvenile programs or the juvenile division that could get them going on the right path. And because if they don't, then of course there are grave consequences that could follow as they mature into adulthood.
Thank you. We'll move on to a different kind of disparity. According to campaign finance records, Mr. Marsh has raised $84,000 in this race, while Mr. Green has raised $23,300. What should voters take away from that? Mr. Marsh, we'll begin with you. You have 30 seconds.
Well, I'm humbled by the support of my donors and those. If you look at them, they're members of the bar. They're from the civil bar, plaintiffs and defendants. They're from the criminal bar, the prosecution and private defense counsel. They're from individual people in the community, business owners, and they've opened up to this campaign because they've appeared before me, and they know that even when they lose, they're treated with dignity and respect, and I've served them well.
Thank you. Mr. Green.
Although there is a disparity, one of the most proud things I am with my campaign is the wide-ranging donors that are in my donor list. And if you take a look at that, you'll see that we've got support from all areas of the community, whether it's teachers, doctors, lawyers, business owners. Even small dollar donations mean the world to me because it's a show of support for my candidacy and a show of support for me as a circuit judge in the Second Judicial Circuit.
Thank you. The Second Judicial Circuit has invested heavily in drug court, mental health court, veterans court, and other problem-solving courts focused on rehabilitation. Do you see these courts as central to the future of justice in this circuit, and when are they appropriate versus traditional sentencing? Mr. Green, you have 45 seconds.
Yeah, I absolutely think that they're crucial to the success and to the safety of our community moving forward. These programs are oftentimes very rehabilitative in nature, and I think that they're appropriate in some cases, not all cases. I think they're appropriate in low-level, misdemeanor cases and perhaps some felony drug offense cases. But these programs help people get back on the right track and help people pick up from where they left off after they've made mistakes.
Thank you. Lee Marsh, 45 seconds.
As a veteran, Veterans Treatment Court is close to my heart. Some of these men and women have given so much, and they face some roadblocks when they get back into our society outside the military. Similarly with drug court, some people are dealing with mental health issues that are not addressed, and they're self-medicating. These courts are crucial and vital, and I've sent people there to them, and I support them fully because they give people a second and sometimes a third chance that they need, because it's a recognition of the dignity of the human so that they can rejoin our society and be successful.
Thank you. For our final question in this segment, Mr. Marsh, will continue with you. Courts are increasingly part of the response to untreated mental illness, as jails often become the default system of care. What responsibility does a circuit judge have to address mental health issues when they intersect with criminal behavior? 45 seconds.
I've dealt with this for years as a criminal law judge, and one of the things we do is sometimes we spot it, we recognize it, but it's also to make sure the parties are involved in looking at alternatives, looking at treatment, getting people, if they need to get to a state facility, to get the desired treatment and products that they need. So I've been involved in that, but ultimately it's getting the sides together, getting the parties talking so that they can take advantage of these resources.
Thank you. Mr. Green.
I can speak as a criminal defense attorney who sees these issues often, and really it's starting to identify it at the party level and then bringing attention to it in the court and finding ways sometimes to find alternatives to prosecution when mental health is a serious issue that's affected the criminal behavior.
Thank you. Over to you, Steve.
Okay, candidates, it's your turn. We've been asking a lot of questions up here, so what's one question you would like to ask your opponent? And we'll start with you, Mr. Green, 45 seconds.
Has your name ever appeared on a ballot?
No, it is not. I was elected without opposition in 2020. My question is, my opponent first initially filed in another race that was to go in 2022 against another judge. Why did he switch to this race?
That was an error at the Department of State.
Okay. Danielle?
Okay. So let's see. For this next one, Mr. Green, we'll start with you. Are you a member of the Federalist Society or any other legal association? And if so, how long have you been a member? And what about this group made you want to align yourself with it? 30 seconds.
I am not a member of the Federalist Society.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
I was once, briefly. Somebody invited me when I got off active duty in the Navy, and it was an opportunity to meet people. But when I became a judge, I realized the Federalist Society, the American Constitutional Society, those were not associations I thought that judges should be involved in.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Marsh, we'll continue with you. What, if any, do you feel is the role of your religious faith in a judge's decision-making process? You have 45 seconds.
Well, I'm an elder at my church. I think religion to me is important for me spiritually and to help give me moral clarity. But it doesn't enter into the decision-making. Because I rule on cases where people may be atheists, they may have other religious affiliations, and that's not what they're expecting. They're expecting a judge that follows the law, treats them equally with dignity and respect, and that's what goes into my decision-making. It's just I pray every day that God gives me the wisdom to follow the law and treat each party equally.
Thank you. Mr. Green.
I think one's faith should guide them morally in their personal lives. But sitting in the capacity of a circuit judge, your faith should have no outcome over the decisions that you make as a judge.
You gentlemen are quick today. So, Mr. Green, we will continue with you for this next one. What is your history of community involvement, and how do you envision that role changing if you are elected to the bench? 45 seconds.
Yeah, so I did mention this earlier as a youth coach for football and baseball. I'm also a member of voluntary bar associations, the Tallahassee Barristers, and I don't envision my community involvement changing much. I hope to stay entrenched in the community because I think that's one of the best ways to inform a judge in his decision-making process, is to know the community, to know it well, and to be in it and among it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Marsh.
Well, professionally, I'm a member of the American Inns of Courts, which mentors lawyers. But in the community, I'm an elder at my church. I'm also a member of the Rotary Club of Tallahassee. And most important to me, I'm a dad. I'm a chorus dad, and I was a swimming dad when my eldest was swimming. And so I help out in the local community theater as well as the school chorus programs and building stages. And so I'll continue to remain engaged with those local community efforts.
Thank you. Lee Marsh, will stay with you for this next one. What role does social media play for judges and judge candidates? What guidelines do you put in place? 30 seconds.
Well, I'm not a big social media guy, but I do have a social media presence to get out word to the voters so that you can learn about me. But other than that, I think I like looking at pictures of people's kids, find out what they're doing, hear about their sports teams. I follow the guidance put out by the Florida Supreme Court and the Judicial Ethics Advisory Commission. I follow the canons. I'm not a big social media guy, but I understand that people want to learn about us.
Thank you. Rashad Green.
Yeah, I think the role that social media plays is to give the public the opportunity to learn about the candidates and what they're doing and the type of people that they are.
Okay, thank you.
All right, folks, we have a few kind of closing questions for y'all, if we may advance that, starting with you again, Mr. Green. How would you define injustice? And what do you perceive as the greatest obstacles to justice in 2026? You get a minute for this one.
Yeah, so I would define an injustice as an outcome in a case that does not fit the moral fabric of society or, in some cases, the facts that were presented in court. I think that lawyers and judges alike have a grave responsibility to always seek justice and all of the things that they do in their dealings with the court and with the community. As far as obstacles goes, there are many. I'm not sure that there are several that a judge can tackle from the bench, but being aware that injustice exists and doing everything that you can as a neutral arbiter of the facts and the law to prevent it is how a sitting circuit judge should handle that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Marsh.
Injustice is when the facts don't get applied properly to the law, and so the outcome is illegal. And that happens often in a number of ways, some of which is resource-driven. We have people, a lot of people we see in court can't afford an attorney, and they may not be a criminal case. And so it's incumbent upon the judge to make sure all the processes are followed, that the individuals that come before the court know what the court's deciding and why the court's deciding it, and that the court is not using outside influences anyway, things that the parties are not able to respond to in making his or her decisions. And so those are the biggest things to combat injustice.
Staying with you, J. Lee Marsh, what are your thoughts on the role of restorative justice? And for the benefit of those unfamiliar with the term, could you give a quick definition, please? And you have a minute for this, please.
All right, restorative justice is the restoration of a defendant through reconciliation with a victim. And these are driven not by the court necessarily, but by the parties. And they've done a good job. Our state attorney, our public defender have worked in this realm to get people to talk. It's so that they can feel better, because throwing somebody in jail isn't always going to bring closure to a victim. Sometimes it's an apology. It's that individual seeking out the services they need and making their lives better so that it brings some meaning to whatever has befallen the victim.
Thank you. Rashad Green, same question.
Yes, I think restorative justice is very important in our process. It oftentimes can make a victim whole, and also, sometimes victims, as the judge said, is not seeking, punitive form of justice. They may be seeking restitution if they've lost, property or whatever the case may be. So I think it's, a huge part of the criminal justice system, and it's a very important part.
All right, staying with you, Mr. Green, the Tallahassee legal community is relatively close-knit, if we can use that term. A lot of attorneys appear repeatedly before the same judges, so how do you maintain impartiality when you regularly see the same lawyers, agencies, law enforcement officers in your courtroom? 45 seconds.
One great thing about the Tallahassee legal community is its professionalism. We oftentimes see each other out at different events, and we never allow, our friendships, and in most cases, to overcome the duties that we have to carry out in a courtroom. And so I think maintaining high levels of professionalism is key there.
All right, Mr. Marsh, please.
Well, I think it's important that we know one another, because we treat each other with dignity and respect. These are people, we know one another's children, we know each other's spouses, and it keeps us professional, so that the job of attorneys is to solve problems amicably. And sometimes we need judges and juries to do that, but it allows people to work together where they can work together, and it allows people to understand the decisions made by judges are not personal. They're based on the facts and the law. That's why I'm glad I have the support of so many that have appeared before me. Even the ones that have lost before me, they've supported me in doing this role, and I appreciate that.
Okay, Mr. Marsh, what is a judge's role in ensuring that all parties that appear before the court are heard respectfully and given a fair chance to present their positions, including those who do not have legal representation? 45 seconds.
Dignity and respect. It's making sure, though, that when people come into court, they know what the court is trying to decide that day. And so the judge needs to let them know, I understand we're dealing with lots of issues, but today this is the one issue we're going to deal with. And so just making sure the person is informed and given the opportunity to speak is important. And so that's what I implement in my courtroom.
Okay, Mr. Green.
Yeah, so a judge sets the tone of their courtroom. And a judge is the leader of the judicial process in his courtroom. And so a judge must act with humility and respect and treat all of the parties that come before it with dignity. And I think that if a judge does that, then we'll achieve that goal.
All right, and sticking with you for a moment, Mr. Green, well, 45 seconds anyway. How do you work with staff and other parties to make sure that proceedings run smoothly and that orders are issued in a timely manner?
How do I work with staff?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so as a judge, how would I work with staff?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would be fair and impartial in the execution of my duties, and then also I would act with respect and humility, and to treat people how I would want to be treated in the execution of my duties. I would make sure that my judicial assistant was well aware of my procedures and the procedures that I have in place, so that we're able to get through our dockets quickly and maintain a reasonable caseload. And so I think communication is key with that. But finding the right people with the right attitudes is also very important.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Marsh.
For the last 30 years, I've been involved with organizations that try to accomplish a mission, from the United States Navy, dealing with people of every background and locale, to now on the judicial circuit, where I have a wonderful, this is a shout out to my judicial assistant, Marcy, that keeps me where I need to be and when I need to be. But I encourage everybody, the way I do it is working with the clerks, the bailiffs, the court reporters, the paralegals, the attorneys. Just ask them that practice in our circuit about me. It's about being a team member and making sure we all pull our load and we all back up one another.
All right. A question of personal privilege, if I could throw this in. We had already addressed the social media question earlier in our forum today, but I was just interested, and you can answer this with a single yes or no. Do either one of you have aspirations of putting your courtroom on an Instagram channel anytime in the future? Mr. Green?
To be completely honest, have not thought of that. But if, I would certainly consider that if it helped the public understand the process and the proceedings. I know some judges use Zoom dockets that are broadcast on YouTube. So I'm not sure if it would come in the form of an Instagram channel, but having live proceedings would certainly be something I would consider.
Okay, Mr. Marsh.
I'm absolutely open to it. Any Zoom hearing, I allow everybody in it. We have an open courtroom. Anyone is welcome to come in and attend, either in person or when there are cameras by video.
All right, gentlemen, we have come to nearly the end of the road here. Closing arguments, as we call it here. And 1 minute, starting with you, Mr. Marsh, and then Mr. Green. Your chance to speak directly to voters, share your website, anything else that you think that we have left uncovered today that you would like to get out there. So, again, if we could start with you, Mr. Marsh, and then Mr. Green. 1 minute.
It has been a privilege of a lifetime for the last 8 years to serve as your circuit judge. I've dedicated my life to service. I'm the grandson of a blue-collar worker that had nothing but a high school degree, came back from World War II, and raised 2 children. He worked in the trucking industry and the railroads, and he raised 2 children that gave their lives to community service. My mom worked for the Leon County Schools. My dad worked for the state of Florida for their entire careers, and they've raised me to do that. I've served 20 years in the United States Navy as a submarine officer and as a judge advocate, and now I'm your circuit judge. I've done over 100 jury trials as a judge. I've served and had cases in each division. I ask you to keep the service and the experience here of a lifelong Tallahassee native.
Thank you. Rashad Green.
Thank you. For my entire life, I've wanted to be a lawyer and then one day a judge at the tutelage of my grandfather, the Honorable Joseph Woodrow Hatchett. If given the opportunity to serve you in this capacity, I will bring all of the experience with me that I have to date, which is serving alongside judges, trying cases as an assistant state attorney, arguing appeals on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and my experience as a civil defense litigator. From a very young age, this has been what I've wanted to do, and my path and my career path, my trajectory. And so as a Tallahassee native and a son of this city, I'm asking for your support. You can learn more about my campaign on green2026.com, and I'm looking forward to seeing each and every one of you out on the campaign trail. Thank you for having me.
Thank you to the candidates and to our audiences for joining the Capital Region News Collaborative and the League of Women Voters of Tallahassee for this program. You can find a replay of this forum on our partners' YouTube pages and websites, and the recorded broadcast will be aired July 14th at 11 a.m. Eastern on WFSU 88.9 FM. So please tell your friends.
Also, tell them that our next forum will take place this afternoon at 1 p.m. and feature the candidates for Tallahassee City Commission C3. Candidates are Darrell Alford Jr., Tom Derzopolsky, Alethea Edwards, Max Hurley, PJ Perez, and Norm Roach. You can learn more about the upcoming forums and the collaborative at cnf.org/CRNC.
And remember, to cast your ballot for this race, you must be a registered voter. The voter registration deadline for the primary is July 20th. Early voting begins August 8th and ends on the 16th. Primary election day takes place on August 18th. Many of our listeners have candidate signs in their yard. When their elections are done, there will be 2 windows to recycle candidate signs. The first is from August 19th and runs to September 18th. There will be another after the general election in November. Just bring your signs to the specially marked dumpsters at the locations on your screen to keep them out of our local landfills.
And if you have questions for any of our upcoming forums, please drop us an email, won't you, at news@tallahassee.com. Again, thanks for joining us. Have a great day.